Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi tahirin. Okay, so we were talking about many classes. We had six classes actually, talking about the different arguments against the claim of is of there being no arguments to prove the existence of Allah. So I gave the argument of design. I gave the argument of contingency. I gave the argument of causality, the argument of prime mover, the fitra argument as well, and the last one, this intrinsic nature argument. Humans love perfection and they seek perfection. They love absolute perfection. So they're inclined to seek Allah. They're inclined to knowing Allah the Exalted. Now in Hadith, when it comes to the fitra, we have Hadith that says the fitra is Islam, and Islam is having its basis upon Tawheed. We have the kind of indication in the Hadith as well. We have another Hadith says it's Tawheed, and we have one that kind of explains it. But so this kind of goes along with this. We realize Allah exists. We are inside ourselves. We know that Allah exists, and it is innate inclination to submit to Allah the Exalted. So that's fitra. Then we close the section on these are many arguments, and there's other arguments. You have to see are they good arguments or not. There's many other arguments that may be brought, or different arguments that may be used to prove the existence of Allah the Exalted. So now we move to the next claim or of the atheistic claim. Now, this one is a somewhat tricky claim. It has amongst it many tricky claims go along with this one. So this one is related to the power of Allah the Exalted. Is there something that God cannot create? Can God create something or can he create something like another God? Or like they say, a stone that he can't lift? If he can, okay, he's all powerful, but then they would argue there's two gods. It's putting the idea out there. We're gonna address it. Or if you say he can't, then they'll say, okay, he's limited in his power. Okay, so this is the kind of approach that they have, this kind of like sophistry, false kind of approach. And I'll show why. But first, before we go into it, let's talk about what we mean by power. Now, firstly, power is a sifat dhati. It's an essential attribute of Allah the Exalted. So us in the Shia school of theology, we believe that Allah's essence, His self, is all power. He is all power, just like He's all knowledge. It's the same thing. It's not something different. It's not separate. It's the same absolute exalted being. It doesn't have parts. Allah is all power. He's all powerful. Allah is all knowledge. He's all knowing. So, Qudra or power or being Qadir means in the science of belief system in Ilmu Aqaid or Ilmu Kalam simply that Allah is not forced to do something. Allah is not forced to do something. Hence, if one is able to choose in whatever they want, they're able to choose between this or that, then that being is capable and there's no force occurring. No force occurring. So this is what they mean technically by power or qudra. They mean Allah is not forced to do anything. There can be no force on Allah the Exalted. So Allah is not restricted. Allah can do whatever He wants. He's capable to do whatever He wants, whatever He wills. Even wants here, it's not like us with like desires and stuff. Allah can do whatever He wills to do. It's more correct language. So there are two views about what the definition of power and powerful are. So I kind of just alluded to it, but let's see. The first view which is the definition which many theologians accept, is that the powerful is he who has an attribute through which it is possible to do or not do a particular thing. This is the definitions which many theologians have accepted. The second is that the powerful is the one who does something if he wants to and refrains from doing something if he wants to. So some theologians have accepted this definition, and the philosophers as well are amongst those who accept this definition. So what's the common point between both these definitions that they have? The common point is that both these definitions are agreeing that the powerful one is the one that is not compelled or forced to do or not do. It's important. Sometimes maybe we think of being compelled or forced to do something. You know, you're told you have to do something, so you do it. But it's also in not doing something. There's no restriction here. No compulsion, no force on either side. Allah is able to do whatever Allah wills to do. So in this definition, they all agree on that. So this would indicate to us that the all-powerful, the powerful is independent. Because all dependent things that are able to do things, they are limited, they are restricted, they are somehow compelled in certain areas. Me as a human being, I cannot take my arms and start flapping and fly. I'm restricted. Allah has given me only so much ability that's dependent. All humanity together cannot say be it and it is and create the universe. No, they can't even create a fly. All they do is just use the things Allah has already created. They're just discover and use what Allah has already created. They're not innovators, they're discoverers. They're not creators, they are mixers and putting it together, discovery kind of thing. So this is what we're hitting at as being all-powerful, that Allah the Exalted is not forced or compelled to do something or to not do it. Allah is absolutely powerful. He's able to do whatever He wills to do. Okay, so what is the proof for that? How do we prove that Allah the Exalted is all-powerful? Well, an argument here that I brought, we can ponder on this, is that the fact that the entire creation exists. We know this, and we called attention to this in previous arguments. This entire vast creation, it exists. The world exists. The world and the universe has occurred. The fact that these things, that creation, that contingent existences exist, and that it's been caused, all of this has been caused, negates the possibility of God being forced to act. If something is forced to act, then it must always be forced to act. So what is forcing it? It would have to be forced forever. Always have that restriction on it. It is then also weak because it's being forced. So there must have been something more powerful than it to force it. It must also be limited if it is forced, because it's being restricted to that act. Therefore, the fact that God exists, and then there was nothing, and then something was brought into existence, into contingent existence proves that Allah the Exalted has ability to will something. It proves that he has power to will. And he's willed all this, as we see with Burhani Nizam and argument of design and causality argument and contingent existence argument. And this is no small thing that's being made here. So Allah the Exalted has ability to will, to decide, but not like we decide, yeah? Because again, Allah does what he knows he's doing. It's within his knowledge. When he does it, then it becomes sifato, as an attribute of action, and all attributes of action are created. He creates things. Once he creates things, then wills things. Now it's these wills, this creation, these are created things. So hence it shows that he was not forced. So the universe is a sign, the creation is a sign, contingency is a sign that Allah the Exalted is not forced to do something. He is a free agent, we could say, if that gets the meaning across. Absolutely. Okay. So the fact that contingent existence exists, I probably said it before. Contingent existence as mumkin al-wujud. They're those things, when we look at contingency in its essence, what is it in its mahiyya, in its quiddity? It's something which is not necessary to exist on its own and not impossible to exist on its own. It's possible to exist in its very essence, the very essence of contingency itself, which is all creation. Something needs to cause it to exist. They need to, like metaphorically, it needs to be pushed into existence, even though it didn't exist before that. So the fact that all these things that we know are contingent existences, that all these things exist, that the effects of the cause exist, and that these things occurred, like the argument of huduth, shows us that Allah has power. Allah is able to do what he wills. Now we said earlier, when talking about the argument of the wajib al-wujud, necessary being, we said earlier, I think I said it here, but if not, let me know. So the notion of wajib al-wujud belongs to God. So this is something that only Allah the Exalted is wajib al-wujud. Only Allah the Exalted is necessary being. Be dhatihi, in itself, or li dhatihi. So only Allah the Exalted is wajib al-wujud in itself. Therefore, when we considered power, we just discovered he must be powerful. But is it limited or unlimited? Is this power limited or unlimited? If it were limited power, then this would mean that God is needy. And if God is needy somehow, in any way, then we would say then he would not be wajib al-wujud. And we'd go back to that argument of wajib al-wujud, and we say there have to be a wajib al-wujud. So God cannot be needy at all. This wajib al-wujud being is needless. So, yes.
How do we come to the conclusion that there has to be a wajib al-wujud? Like why can't everything be mumkin al-wujud?
So mumkin in itself, right? Contingent in itself, but by itself means that it doesn't necessarily exist on its own, right? So it needs something to cause it, because in its very essence of contingency, just let me know if it's like too much, because maybe there's a simpler way to explain it. But in the very essence of contingency, it needs something to cause it to exist, right? Does that point make sense?
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Okay.
So basically, the definition of contingent
Yeah,
means that
yeah. So
something must have.
yeah. So once we say contingency, then that needs a being to cause it. Now we say, can that cause be infinite
No.
causes? Okay, to say even if so, no, it has to end at a necessary clause or tell or door or something like that, which we don't accept. But say even if we say it is a endless chain of causes, well, we just said that there's an endless chain of contingent causes. So we have the same problem. That whole body of contingent causes are contingent. They need something to cause them. So there has to be a necessary being. Did that last point make sense?
Oh, I get it now. Yeah.
Yeah, so it
So wait,
always
like
results back.
all these arguments are like pretty related.
Yeah. I think this. I honestly, I think this argument of wajib al wujud is one of the most beneficial arguments that I've really come across in these areas. It answers a lot
Hmm.
of theological issues. Everything from anthropomorphism to issues about maybe does God have emotions, and all sorts of things could be talked about in these with this notion. So it's very important. Okay,
Right.
so
Sounds
are
so
you
true.
any did I get your question good or anything
Yeah,
else?
I think you got it. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so if it were limited, then this would mean he is needy somehow. Hence, he would not be wajib al wujud, as that is a quality for contingent beings. Being needy itself is what contingency is in its essence. If it's needy, it's contingent. So we cannot say he has limited power now. We just proved that that power cannot be limited. Therefore, his power has to be unlimited power, independent and absolute power. So Allah the Exalted has absolute power. He can do whatever he wills to do. Okay. So that's the intellectual way to come across it. But now we have this question, this atheistic question. Let's see. How can we address it? The claim, if God can do whatever he wants, that God is all powerful, then can he create a God which is all powerful just like him? See? If God is all powerful, he could do whatever he wants. Can he create another all powerful God that can do exactly like him? So let's answer. First, the question is wrong. This is an incorrect question. This is kind of a trick on playing on words. It's a play kind of to trick your mind. Why? Because we are not talking about two contingent beings or contingent and necessary here, as there can only be one wajib al wujud, lidatihi. Because if there was a difference between these two wajib al wujuds, say you have two wajib al wujud beings, there would be a difference. It would indicate that there is a distinction between wajib A and wajib B. This would mean if there's a distinction between them, because they're either the same being or two different beings. And the argument, the question assumed that there would be two wajib al wujud beings, so they have to be different. So if wajib A and you have wajib B, they are different in something. This means that these beings are compound beings. We call this murakkab. We have something in philosophy called basit, simple, and murakkab. Murakkab is when you have two or more parts, they come together. Like my body is murakkab, human being is murakkab. A simple being has no parts. It's one unique being. That's Allah's one unique being. So what's the problem with these being compound beings? Well, they would be composed of two parts then. Wajib A would have two parts and Wajib B would have two parts. They would have a common part amongst them and a difference to them. So they have two parts. Hence, what happens here when it becomes a compound being? It means that that being is now needy for its parts. It's now needy for their parts. And that is what a contingent being is. A contingent being is needy. And that's against our very notion of wajib al-wujud itself again. Because we're saying wajib al-wujud is not needy. Contingent beings are needy. So the result of such a thing would be a being that is not like God. It would be a contingent being. And it wouldn't be God at all. It would be dependent, just as hypothetical about the kind of argument. So the argument is wrong. The question is wrong. Also, if this were to happen, it would indicate limitation. And limitation is a quality of contingent beings. Why? Because now you have two beings and they're different in an aspect. So wajib A is different from wajib B. So they are now limited in their difference. So if they're limited, then it means they are needy because they're limited. They're contingent beings as well, which is again against our notion of wajib al-wujud. So the question here is wrong. Can God create another being which is all-powerful like him? The question is wrong. That position of being God only belongs to God, no one else. It's not possible for any other being to ever take that. It's not possible for any being to receive that. Why? Because everything that God creates is going to be lesser than him. Everything that God creates is going to be limited. Everything that God creates is going to be dependent and contingent. This is how it is. This is what creation is. So the argument is wrong. It's just some kind of trickery. Okay. So the second answer that we could give is yes, we can say God has power to do whatever he wills. Yes, God has power to do whatever he wills. His power is unlimited. But some things God will not do. God will not do. Like Allah the Exalted will not do injustice. Yes, of course, Allah has the power to wipe out every single being in the universe, good, bad, and not give anybody anything. Of course, God can do that, but it's not just. And we know God is just. And there's other, topics in theology about the justice of God. And this is I think I mentioned in the beginning. This is something that is one of the fundamentals of the Shia madhab in theology. It's very important one to have. God will not do injustice. God acts justly. That is the belief amongst the Adliya and the Shia madhab. So there are things that God will not do, even though he has power to do everything. There are things he will not do. God does not will to do such a thing. And some things can't be done due to the receptivity of things. Like, if you have a very it's kind of a metaphorical kind of example, and it's very low example, but just maybe to get the idea across, because God is much greater than this example. But if you have a very strong man, you have somebody who could lift like, I don't know, thousands of pounds, hundreds of pounds or something, very strong man. If you give that very strong man a feather and tell him to throw it, that feather is not going to throw very far. If you give him a rock, he can throw it very far. And with a limitation here of no matter how much muscle strength this guy has, is in the receptivity of the thing that's being thrown. The feather cannot be thrown like a rock, and a rock cannot reach more distance than its own receptivity. So, of course, Allah the Exalted is unlimited, can do whatever he wills, but sometimes there's things that their receptivity cannot handle. Just like all contingency, they cannot handle being wajib al-wujud. They can't. No contingent being can ever be wajib al-wujud. No contingent being can ever be wajib al-wujud. As they are contingent in their essence, in their very selves. All creation are contingent beings. They're all mumkin al-wujud. They all require a cause. They're not self-subsisting, eternally, independently, needless. They all require and are needy in their very essence. They always require wajib al-wujud. Therefore, there can be only one unique wajib al-wujud. Everything else is not caught. Everything else is not Allah. Everything else is needy for Allah the Exalted and dependent on Allah the Exalted. Allah is the rich. Us creation are in poverty, more poverty than we realize. We are in deep poverty of our very existence, depending and needy to Allah the Exalted in every single aspect. We have nothing except that it is dependent on Allah the Exalted. Even the fact of us being able to choose between doing this or that, even this ability is something that Allah has willed for us to have, and we are tested with it. Nothing escapes Allah the Exalted. So everything else is not God. Everything else is needy and dependent on Allah the Exalted. So they can never be God. They can never be wajib al-wujud. They'll always be a contingent being. Now, they can work up to realization of how needy we are. They can work up to realization of how much we don't really possess anything and we're really dependent on Allah the Exalted. And they can get close to realizing and humbling themselves in front of Allah the Exalted. So that's another one. Now, there's some other misgivings that we have. These are very philosophical kind of topics, by the way, that we had. So another misgiving or another claim, can God create a being which he cannot destroy or annihilate? You know, this kind of question is tricky. Can God create a being which he cannot destroy or annihilate? If he cannot, if you say he cannot, then it means his power is limited. And if he can, it follows that after creating it, his power is limited. Because why? Because he cannot destroy it or annihilate it, right? So this is a kind of a argument or approach, a sophistic kind of argument to try to box a person into saying God's power is limited. Okay, so how can we answer this? Such a being created is impossible by itself, because such a hypothetical being is contingent. It's mumkin, and contingent by itself, in itself. So mumkin, it's being is mumkin, contingent by itself, and necessary by itself at the same time while being created. By being created, it is contingent by its essence, and being perishable, it is impossible by its essence. So, okay, it is this hypothetical being is contingent, and the necessary being is necessary by itself. If you say this contingent being is necessary and contingent, well, saying it's necessary and contingent at the same time while being created at the same time, it is contingent. By its very essence, it's still contingent being. And being perishable, it is impossible by essence. Saying it's being impossible to perish. So this is a contradiction in essence. And it is impossible to have such a contradiction. Either it is this or that. Okay? Either it is a possible being, a contingent being, and then it is possible it gets destroyed. It's not necessary in itself. Or it's necessary in itself, and it cannot be destroyed. It cannot be both of those things. It's either one or the other. So that is an answer to that. Now, last one we have, I'll try to finish it here, is can God create something similar to himself? If he can, it follows that he is not unique. And if he cannot, then his power is limited. So how to answer this? This is impossible in essence, because like stated earlier, that he is the necessary being, the only necessary being by essence, by himself, And if that other thing was necessary being by essence or by itself, it conflicts that it was created in the first place. It wouldn't be created, it wouldn't be contingent. But it is created, as the statement said itself. Notice the statement. It said, can God create something similar to himself? Well, you said created. Well, created indicates that it's contingent. So it conflicts the very statement. The result that you're seeking with this kind of statement conflicts your very statement itself, because it is created. Because it said, can he create? Which would mean it is a contingent being. It's contingent by itself, by its essence. And being the necessary being and contingent being together in one being is a contradiction. It's either one or the other. So saying that there's going to be another being that is similar to God. Well, there can't be a similar being to God, because he is really the only wajib al-wujud. And all other things are mumkin al-wujud. All other things are contingent beings. So those are some misgivings about all the power of Allah, and some of the, there's no other slide here. You can think about it on the contingency. So here I will end this lesson. Wa akhiru du'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. If you have any questions, brother, you could feel free.